This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Thank you everybody for coming. It's really an honor to host Rabbi Glatstein. I remember the first time I heard Rabbi Glatstein, I was on a Kivrei Tzadikim tour in Europe, and I went on Torah Anytime to see if there's any hachana, preparation I could do before going to each kever. And it was amazing enough that Rabbi Glatstein goes through each kever, and I think while you're at the kvarim, you were speaking about each tzaddik, stories, Torahs of each one, and that was the first time I was introduced to the breadth of knowledge Rabbi Glatstein brings to Shiurim. History and stories and Torah, it's really amazing. And it's really an honor to have Rabbi Glatstein here, especially speaking about this subject that's on everyone's mind, the times of Mashiach. And I'm very excited to see what Rabbi Glatstein has to teach us tonight. So without further ado, Rabbi Glatstein.
Okay, good evening everyone. Thank you so much for hosting me. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here. I was here about 2 years ago, and it's a real honor to be here again. Of course, the subject on everybody's mind is the events that are transpiring before our eyes, and we hope it's more than wishful thinking. We hope that actually we're close to the finish line. We hope that what's taking place is, the final leg before the great day that we're all hoping and yearning for. And I think it's important to get a historical context. What exactly is the role of Yishmael in the destiny of the Jewish people, in world history? Where do they fit in? Because we know we have a tradition, and this is something discussed in the Medrash Rabbah, particularly in Sefer Bereshis, that the Medrash tells us there are 4 Galios, there are 4 exiles. Practically every time the number 4 appears in Bereshis, whether it's the 4 rivers in Gan Eden, whether it's the 4 languages of darkness, whether it's the 4 languages of darkness in the Bris Bein Havasarim, probably about a half a dozen times in Sefer Bereshis we encounter the number 4 every time the Medrash Rabbah says 4 Galios. Bavel, Babylon, Paras Madai, Persia, and of course the Media is the biggest Galus of all. And then we have Yavan, and then we have Raimi, Edom. And Yishmael never makes the list. Yishmael is not on the list. What role does Yishmael play? So I want to start off today's Shiur just by mentioning 2 Gemaras and how the Maharal understands it, and that will just be by way of introduction. We have 2 Gemaras in Shas that tell us that in the end of days there will only be 2 nations standing. It doesn't mean 2 nations, it means 2 world superpowers. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah, on Daf Beis, the Gemara says in the end of days, Rebbe Shalom is going to take a Sefer Torah, he's going to say, anyone who learned this, come get your reward. And all the nations are going to clamor. And the Gemara says that Hashem says, no, order please, let's do this in an organized fashion. And the Gemara says the first nation to walk in is the most chashuv of all, and that is Edom, Raimi. And then the Gemara says the next nation that comes in is Paras, Persia. And then the Gemara asks, why Davka these nations? Says the Gemara, because they're chashuv. Asks the Gemara, why are they chashuv? Because these are the only 2 powers that will last until Mashiach comes. Which is difficult to understand. There will only be 2 world powers when Mashiach comes. Raimi. Now what's Raimi? The Roman Empire? Roman Empire is long gone. The Roman Empire crumbled more than well over 1,500 years ago. What do you mean the Roman Empire? So it's generally understood that's the Western world, the United States of America. They're the spiritual heirs of what's called Judeo-Christian value. America, USA. And what's Paras? The Persian Empire? Persian Empire is long gone. By the way, if you want to see a remnant of the Persian Empire, you could go to the British Museum, and they have a coffee mug of a Persian who drank hot cocoa 2,000 years ago, but you don't have the cup, you just have the handle. That's what's left of the Persian Empire today. So what does the Gemara mean? In the end of days, there'll be two nations standing, Roimi and Paras. The Gemara doesn't say, so people would like to think it's Iran. Iran will be the other world power. It's hard to say that. Paras refers to Iran. Are Iranians today in any way ethnically, culturally, genetically descendants of the original Persian Empire? No, they're not at all. You could do your own research. That's one Gemara. There's another Gemara in Yuma. The Gemara asks, in the end of days, who will beat who? The Gemara says there'll be two nations standing, Roimi and Paras. Who will beat who? The Gemara brings two opinions. Rabbi Yochanan holds Paras will beat Roimi. Now, if you're an American, that does not make you feel too comfortable. The opinion of Rabbi and Rabbi Yochanan is that Paras defeats Roimi. Now, that's not a comforting thought. I didn't come here from New York to make you comfortable. That's not my job. I'm here to report the facts. That's what the Gemara says. And then the Gemara brings the opinion of Rav, that Paras will fall to Roimi. Okay. But again, there'll only be two nations standing, Paras and Roimi. So back to the original question. Why is Yishmael not on the list of the four Galios? The Maharal gives two answers. I'm just going to tell you his second answer, because this second answer is the answer the Maharal says, which is the definitive answer. Says the Maharal, Yishmael is one of the four Galosim. Which one? Galos Paras. Asks the Maharal, but the Persian Empire fell and Yishmael is a different ethnicity. Says the Maharal, the Galosim are not ethnicities, they're character traits. And the Persians and the Yishmaelim have the same character traits. What are they? The Gemara in Avodah Zarah says, Paras waged many wars, conquered many cities. This is the defining nature of Yishmael. According to Maharal then, in the end of days there'll be two powers standing. The Western world and Yishmael, which is exactly what we see. And who will beat who? It's machlekes. We wish both sides Hatzlacha Rabba Meruba. Who will beat who? The Gemara says, it's a machlekes. Rav says, Roimi will beat Paras. Rebbe and Rabbi Yochanan say that Paras will beat Roimi. So in the end of days, we have these two nations standing, and one thing which is very interesting is there a psak of who the last nation standing will be? The Gemara brings it to machlekes. Without getting into this, but just throwing out there, Reb Chaim Kanievsky says definitively, Yishmael is the last nation standing. And one of the proofs he brings is the Baal HaTurim at the end of this week's Parsha, beginning of next week's Parsha. The Parsha ends, al pnei kol echav nafal. Talks about the family of Yishmael. It says, he will fall upon the face of all of his brethren. And then the next Parsha begins, V'ele toldois Yitzchak. Says the Baal HaTurim, when Yishmael falls in the end of days, Oz Yitzmach ben David. Look at the opening Baal HaTurim, Parshas Toldos. Says Reb Chaim, from here we see, the conclusion is like Rebbe and Rabbi Yochanan, Yishmael is the last man standing, whereupon Mashiach comes. And Reb Chaim has other proofs to this as well. In that context then, I would like to present to you what I think is an original understanding of Akedas Yitzchak. What its relevance is to us today, and some insight in how we overcome Yishmael in the end of days. I hope that after you hear this presentation, you say that I did not give any new insight. This is the clear and simple way of understanding the Akedah, but I do think there's something very novel over here. Let's start with the beginning. Vayhi achar hadvarim ha'ela v'halakim nisas Abraham. So the obvious question is, if you were to be asked, who's being tested over here? Abraham or Yitzchak? Abraham is shechting his son, but Yitzchak's the one who is going to have his throat slit. So who would you write as being tested? If you would have to write about one of them. Shouldn't it say V'alekim Nisa es Yitzchak? Or at least V'alekim Nisa es Abraham v'yes Yitzchak? Why davka V'alekim Nisa es Abraham? This is the question of the Balei HaTosfos, who brings the question in the name of Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. Then the Rebbeinu Shalom comes to Abraham. He says, Kachna es bincha, es yechidcha, asher ahavta. Take your son. And famously, we know Rashi said that Abraham said, I have more than one son. Your only son. They're both my only son. The one you love. I love both of them. Yitzchak. So Rashi's bothered, so just say it straight. What's all this extra verbiage over here? You know, every word of the Torah is so precise. Halachos of major significance are learned out from extra letters. Why does this whole lengthy kachnas binchas yechidcha sharahavsa? Rashi says that Hashem had to bring it on slowly. Otherwise, you might say that Abraham did it because he was startled, he was shocked. So Hashem wanted to demonstrate Avraham Avinu. It was led on very slowly, and he did it anyway. But perhaps you could ask, if the only reason why Hashem said it this way is to bring it on slowly. I'm not a psychologist, but I could imagine there are many tools of bringing on a traumatic news slowly. Hashem could say, maybe sit down, take a deep breath, do some breathing exercises. I have something I want to tell you. Does it dafka have to be take your son, as if that's not traumatic enough? That's not traumatic? Take your son. Oh, don't worry. I'm not bothered because I have an extra one to spare. Okay. Something to think about. Here's the question of the century. You ready for this? So Avram Avinu takes a Shnei Na'arav, his two lads. What do you mean his two lads? Who else is he taking besides Yitzchak? So we know he took Eliezer. And Rashi says he took Yishmael. And we sort of take it for granted. Yishmael came to the Akedah. Right? Since we're little, we know, we learned, Yishmael's at the Akedah. Can I ask you one simple question? What in the world is Yishmael doing at the Akedah? He didn't live in the house anymore. In Parsha's Lech Lecha, Sarah saw Yishmael was mitzachik, ritzicha, avodah zarah. And Sarah comes to Abraham, Vatero Sarah's ben Hagar mitzachik, Vatoimer Abraham, Goresh ben Ha'amazos, get him out of here. Throw him out. Don't send him to like a special yeshiva, a special program. Don't get him a tutor. Don't slide with him. Kick him out of the house. Get him out of the house. And the pasuk says he left. Where did he go? He went to Midbar Paran. And he married an Egyptian woman. And we don't hear from him again. And all of a sudden at the Akedah, Vayikach Eshnei Na'arav Imai, Yishmael came back. What's he doing there? Didn't Sarah throw him out of the house? How did he get back? Why doesn't the Torah say he came back? Isn't that unusual? Sarah just kicked him out of the house and Avram didn't want to. And Hashem said, listen to the lady. Whatever Sarah says, Shema b'koila. So Avram throws him out and gives him a little water and we don't hear from him again. And he's at the Akedah? How did he come to the Akedah? It's been 30-something years since anybody has ever heard from Yishmael. What's he doing at the Akedah? Tosfos asks this question. And Tosfos says, you have to say, he came back that night. I guess it was visiting day or something. He came back. But this would answer another question you can ask. You know, when Hashem said, Kachna es bincha, why did Abraham think it was Yishmael? Did Abraham really think it was Yishmael? If Hashem wants a carbon oila, and you have a choice between the oila tamima Yitzchak and a pera adam Yishmael, why would God want Yishmael as the carbon? This wasn't a punishment, this was a carbon oila. Did Abraham really think God wanted Yishmael? But it's interesting, according to this Taisus, we can understand Abraham's thinking to himself, for the last 30 years, the Almighty never came to me and said, I want your son as a carbon. Abraham says, maybe that's because Yishmael wasn't in the house. But if he came back last night, and that day, the Ribbon Shalom says, Kachna es bincha, es yechidcha, asher ahavta. So Abraham says, I guess it's Yishmael. If he wanted Yitzchak, what happened the last 30 years? Why would he come to me now? And Hashem said, no, he's not the one I want. So then we have to think that if Rebbe Shem didn't want Yishmael, but he had to have wanted Yishmael to be there. Because if he didn't need Yishmael to be there, he could have asked for this Nisayan any time in the previous 30 years. It must be the Hashgacha arranged. Dafka Yishmael should be there, and Hashem should say Kachna es bincha, and Avram should say Yishmael, and Avram's going to say no, and Hashem says no, wrong kid. I want Yitzchak. I don't want Yishmael. Another point. Avram says to the lad, stay with the donkey. So there's a famous Gemara drasha in the Gemara in Kedushin, Am hadoy melech hamar, that a kid born from a maidservant has a halachic status of a chamar, is not related to you. In other words, the Gemara darshans, Yishmael has a halachic status of a chamar. The Beis Halevi asks, there are many junctures in the Torah that the Torah could choose to teach that a child from a shivcha is not your child. Why dafka, in middle of the Akedah, do we need to learn this halachic point that the child from a shivcha is not your child? So I would humbly assert that a very important clue here is found in one word at the end of the Akedah. So the Malach comes to Abraham, if you look at number 9, Kivarech avarechacha, v'harba arba zaracha, k'choich v'yashamayim, v'chachal asher asfas hayam, v'yirash zaracha eshar oivav. Abraham, your descendants, your children, will inherit the gates of their oyevim, of their enemy. The word oyev is a very specific word. There are two ways to say enemy in Lashon HaKodesh. There's a soinei, and there's an oyev. And traditionally we have two types of enemies. We have Esav and we have Yishmael. Which one is the oyev? Which one is the soinei? There are different views in the Rishonim. Rabbeinu Bechaye says, the soinei is Esav. Halacha biyadua, what? Esav, soinei leYaakov. Not halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Some people say halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Tefillin are black, halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Halacha biyadua means it's a fact of life. Halacha biyadua, it's the reality of the world. Esav soinei leYaakov. But the oyev, says Rabbeinu Bechaye, an oyev is worse than a soinei. A soinei is out for the jugular, but he might have rachamim. Says Rabbeinu Bechaye, Yishmael is an oyev. Lo yasim lo rachamim. Yesh beliboy eva oilamis. And when you see some of the footage of the hostages that were taken, Rabbeinu Bechaye's words are very haunting. Al zakein yachberu lo ma'od. They have no rachamim even on the elders. They could capture a guy who survived Eichmann, can't survive Yishmael. Oyev miloshen oy va'avoy, says Rabbeinu Bechaye. This is what Rabbeinu Bechaye interprets the pasuk in Yitzavim. V'nasan Hashem lekecha es kol ha'oloi so'ela al oyevecha v'al soinecha Yishmael Esav. In that case, the Malach is telling Abraham that through the act of the Akedah, your descendants will inherit Shar Oyevav. In other words, we will ascend and triumph over Yishmael through the Akedah. It must be then that the Akedah, aside from the great test for Avraham Avinu, was a way with which Klal Yisrael ascends and triumphs over Yishmael. So let's study this a little bit, because I think it will become very clear. Rashi says on the words, Achar hadvarim ha'ila, after these matters, v'halekim nisas Avraham. Rashi says, after what matters? What's the juxtaposition of the Akedah to what was discussed before? So Rashi says, Achar hadvarim ha'ila, after a conversation between Yitzchak and Yishmael. Yishmael says to Yitzchak, Yitzchak, you think you're an Oved Elokim? You think you're the spiritual heir of your father? Why? Because you have Mila at 8 days old? I had Mila at 13 years old. For me, it's greater Mesiras Nefesh. What do we see from here? That there was a competition taking place. They were both vying to be considered the continuity, the spiritual heirs of Avraham Avinu. What does Yitzchak say back to Yishmael? If the Almighty would tell me to be sacrificed, I would do it now. I would sacrifice my whole body. I would assert, that's why it doesn't say V'Elokim Nisas Yitzchak. Imagine a guy gets up and he says, he makes a neder. I take a neder, in the next 5 years I'm going to learn Bavli and Yerushalmi. So do you say this guy has a Nisayon that he's to learn Bavli and Yerushalmi? No. He took a neder to learn Bavli and Yerushalmi. He committed himself. Not a Nisayon. God's not testing him, he's testing himself. So you can't say Kim Nisas Yitzchak. Yitzchak was Mavtiach, he gave his word. He said, if the Almighty would tell me to be shechted, I would do it. So it's not Kim Nisas Yitzchak. Yitzchak committed to it. Avram never committed to it. It's Kim Nisas Avram. But it's Yitzchak Nisas Yitzchak. But what we see is that at the Akedah, when the Rebbeinu Shalom is telling Yitzchak, or through Abraham, to shech Yitzchak, it was a way of Yitzchak demonstrating his superiority, his rights to the continuity of Abraham, his connection to Eretz Yisrael, and that Yishmael is not a rightful heir. You see, previously, Sarah tells Abraham, get this kid out of the house. Did Abraham want to get the kid out of the house? No. Abraham loved Yishmael. It hurt him. He wanted Yishmael. He davened for Yishmael. He said, Lu Yishmael yichya lefanecha. You know that the Zohar says that we have a taina on Avraham for offering that tefillah. We say, Avraham lo yida'anu. Why didn't you daven for us like you davened for Yishmael? So Hashem tells Avraham, Avraham, listen to Sarah. I have a question. Would you say that Avraham wholeheartedly threw Yishmael out of the house with full understanding? Or what could he do? The Rebbeinu Shalom said, I got to listen to her. Is it possible that in Avraham's mind it wasn't permanent? Is it possible he still had hopes, he still had aspirations, that in fact, Lu Yishmael yichya lefanecha? Well, just because his wife said, throw him out, everything your wife tells you to do b'leiv shalom, you do it. When she tells you to throw out the garbage, so you throw out the garbage, you do it mamish b'leiv shalom, you do it, but not everybody. Hashem was teaching Abraham, Kachna is bincha. So Abraham says, I have 2 banim. Hashem says, you don't. Kachna is yichidcha. They're both yichidim. No. Asher ahav, love both of them. Yitzchak. In other words, Rebbeinu Shalom is saying, I want you to establish that your bincha, your yichidcha, your ahavta is only Yitzchak. And Avram says, what about Yishmael? Hashem says, I'm going to show you in a minute. The Medrash says, they get to the mountain. Vayares hamakoy meirachaik. Avraham sees the Shechina on the har. He turns to Yitzchak, the Medrash says. Yitzchak, you see the Shechina? Yitzchak says, affirmative. He turns to Yishmael. He says, you see the Shechina? Yishmael says, see what? Avraham says, really? You don't even see the Kedusha, the Har HaBayis? Shavu lachem payim im hachamar. You and the chamar share something in common. Neither of you have any appreciation for the Har HaBayis. You can't help but think that the challenge of the Akedah What Hashem was demonstrating to Abraham, to Yitzchak, to Klal Yisrael, who is the spiritual heir of Abraham? Who has rights to Eretz Yisrael? That the only bincha, the only yechidcha, the only ahavta is Yitzchak. And what's Yishmael vis-a-vis the Har Habayis? He's a chamar that's grazing over there. That's his connection to the Har Habayis. In fact, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky in the Emes Yaakov is troubled that according to the other pshat in Rashi brings the pshat that what's achar hadvarim ha'ela? He says after a conversation that the Satan had with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he says, Satan, Avram just made a big party, and from all the karbanos, and from the whole party, he didn't offer you anything. And Hashem said, no, he would even be makriv his son as a carbon. So it says Rabbi Yaakov, according to that pshat and Rashi, it's mamish achar hadvarim ha'ila. But he asks, but according to the other pshat, that it's a conversation between Yitzchak and Yishmael said, I have bris at 13, and Yitzchak said, I would offer my whole body as a sacrifice, then what's the episode of the peace treaty between Avraham Avinu and Avimelech doing there in between the conversation of Yitzchak and Yishmael and the actual Akedah? It's not Achar Hadvar Ma'ila. By the way, I must say, just it's worthwhile to see the Rashbam on the words Achar Hadvar Ma'ila, Dvarim Ayumim, frightening words. The Rashbam learns that the word Nisa does not mean a test. Nisa is Milashain Masa Umariva. Hashem was chepping Abraham. He was bothering him. Why? Says Rebbeinu Shalom, I gave you Eretz Yisrael to live there. I gave it to you to keep. I said to you, there's certain rules of the land. There's certain mitzvahs, lo yisachaya kol neshama. You're making a peace treaty in the Gaza? I didn't give you the Gaza to make a peace treaty. Go kill your son now. I don't give you Eretz Yisrael to make peace treaties. You make peace in the Holy Land, I'm taking away your children. It's Rashbam. No editorial comments, nothing added. Look at the words of the Rashbam. Rashbam says, Hashem did not authorize the Jewish people to make treaties in Eretz Yisrael. What are the repercussions? The repercussions are the most severe that Hashem offers. Rashbam. The Rashbam held that his Perush is even more pshat than Rashi. Okay, but Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky wants to know what's the interruption between the episode of Avraham and Avimelech and the conversation of Yitzchak and Yishmael. Says Rabbi Yaakov something also awesome. He says, what's Yishmael's right to Eretz Yisrael? He quotes the Zohar that Yishmael's connection to Eretz Yisrael is through the zchus of bris milah. It's a pretty powerful zchus. They do bris milah at 13 years old. Says Rabbi Yaakov, you might get really worried now. You might think, Yishmael has bris milah, then they're going to hold on to Eretz Yisrael forever. So before the Akedah, the Torah just wants you to know one thing. There are people called Plishtim, Philistine, Palestinians. What do we know about the Plishtim? Every single time in Tanakh, Plishtim are mentioned, they're always called Arelim, Arelim, Arelim. Every single time. They are the quintessential uncircumcised individuals. So you might ask, says Rabbi Yaakov, so what are they doing in Eretz Yisrael? They're there to show that you don't really need bris milah, and don't worry that Yishmael has bris milah, because they're even plishtim there, and they're the quintessential arelim. So don't worry about Yishmael, says Rabbi Yaakov. Okay, now we're ready for the Akedah. That's how he understands the connection between the episode of Avraham and Avimelech, and then the subsequent Akedas Yitzchak. Isn't it interesting that the Noitzrim, they accept the entire Old Testament. They accept the story of the Akedah. They don't tamper with any of the stories in the Old Testament. They are fine that Avraham Avinu was Ma'ale Yitzchak Avinu at the Akedah. Doesn't bother them. But the Yishmaelim, they changed the narrative. According to their narrative, it is key that Avraham Avinu takes Yishmael at the Akedah. Why do you think it's so important for them to change this narrative? Because the entire purpose of the Akedah is sort of the Makkeh B'Patish of Sarah said, throw him out of the house. And the Rebbeinu Shalom says, but now Hashem is showing Avraham what is Yishmael's connection to Har Habayis and the Holy Land. You know what it is? Shavu lachem payim achamar. Yitzchak shows Yishmael, you might have Milah at 13, but we live with Mesiras Nefesh. Kol yemei chayenu. I can't help but think that aside from the fact that the Akedah was a test for Avraham, but from the perspective of Yitzchak Avinu, our ascendancy over Yishmael is through the story of the Akedah. And therefore the Akedah concludes, V'yirash zaracha es shar oyevav. This is not about Esav, this is about Yishmael. In Parshas Chayei Sarah, what do Lavan and Besuel give a bracha to Rivka? Achoseinu ad hayi la'alfei revava v'yirash zaracha es shar soinav. We're done with Yishmael. They knew Yishmael's out, but they knew she was going to have a Esav. So they're giving her a bracha that Yaakov Avinu should overpower Esav. But now we're in the realm of Yitzchak and Yishmael. V'yirash zaracha is shar oyevav. Fasten your seatbelts. I want to share with you one more segment over here. We all know we suffer from Yishmael until today. Why? What did we do? There's a very frightening Ramban. The Ramban says Sarah's married to Avraham Avinu for a very long time. She couldn't conceive. So Sarah Imenu says to Avraham, you know what? Why don't you take Hagar? Maybe in the zchus of me bringing the tzara into the house, maybe you'll have a kid from her. Ulai yibana mimena. So Hagar marries Avraham. And she conceived immediately. Mibir Rishayna. And then if you want to know where the hypocrisy of Yishmael comes from, she turns around and she says to Sarah, you're a faker, you're not a tzaddikas, I'm the real tzaddikas. See, you're with the guy for decades and decades, you couldn't conceive it, and I was in the Samar B'Yar Rishayna. So I'm the righteous one, right? Sound familiar, this type of rhetoric? So the Torah says that Sarah was insulted by Hagar. Vayavoy el Hagar vatahar vatera ki harasa vatekal gevirta beina. She looked down at Hagar. So what does Sarah do to her? Vate'aneho Sarai. Sarah afflicts Hagar. You know what the Ramban says? Chata imenu be'inoi hazeh. Our matriarch sinned. Can you imagine such a thing? If not for the Ramban, who could say such a thing? The Mefarshim wonder where the Ramban get this from. To say Sarah sinned? He says, and Avraham also sinned, that Avraham let Sarah afflict Hagar. And therefore, Kishama Hashem el Anyech, the Malach tells Hagar, don't worry, you're going to have a kid. God heard your affliction. He's going to be a Pera Adam. Says Rabban, V'nasan la ben sheyehei Pera Adam, la nois zera Avraham v'Sara b'chol minei ha'inoi. Every chas v'shalom, every loyalenu, every besura that we hear from Eretz Yisrael, why? Sarah afflicted Hagar. That alone is like stirring. But many Rishonim don't agree with the Ramban. Many Rishonim say that Sarah did the right thing. So the Rishonim say, isn't it Nekama? Because says the Riva is one of the Balei HaTosfos, the Abarbanel says the Ramban is not correct. Hagar started, Vatekal Gavir Tvainah. Hagar looked down on Sarah. She afflicted Sarah. And it's not considered Nekama if someone afflicts you to afflict them back. Do we pass in that way? I believe in the Sefer Chafetz Chaim, he brings it's a machlokes rishonim. He says nekama is if someone hurts you financially to hurt them back. But if someone insults you, could you insult them back? It's a machlokes rishonim. The Chafetz Chaim, I believe, says safek de'oraisa l'chumra. But it's not clear that if someone hurts your feelings, you can't take revenge. And I'm not here to tell you you should, because I think the Chafetz Chaim says you have to be very wary. But I am here to tell you that there are very important Rishonim that say it is permitted. It's the opinion of the Smag, it's the opinion of Tosfos, it's the opinion of the Barbanel, that Sarah did the right thing in afflicting Hagar, because she started. Now, one of my personal favorite Gedolei Yisrael is the Chida, Reb Chaim Yosef David Azulai. He was one of the most colorful, interesting achronim. He has svarim on such a wide range of topics. He also had a photographic memory, and he traveled throughout Europe to all the well-known libraries, Bodley and Oxford, and he memorized manuscripts of Rishonim. So, for example, there are comments of the Meiri that we did not know about until they discovered the Meiri in the 20th century, other than the Chida who preserved it by memory. One of the Rishonim that the Chida saw in one of the libraries is a Talmud of the Rashba. His name is Rabbi Yaakov Sakili. Recently, if I'm not mistaken, Rabbi Yaakov Sakili wrote a sefer Mincha Belula, and I believe it was published in the 21st century, but the Chida already saw it a few hundred years ago. Rabbi Yaakov Sakili, quoted in the Chida, number 22, takes the side of the Riva and Abarbanel that Sarah was authorized to afflict Hagar because Hagar started. So Rabbi Yaakov Sakili says, God gives everybody a chance to rectify their wrongdoing. And God even gave Hagar a chance to rectify her wrongdoing by afflicting Sarah. And Rabbi Yaakov Sakili reveals an astounding story. Okay? You wouldn't believe such a thing, but what's amazing is that Arizal writes the story, but this was already found in Rishonim. That Yishai, at the end of his life, he got nervous. He was afraid maybe Doeg was right. Maybe I wasn't allowed to marry into the family. Maybe I'm not a kosher Jew. Maybe because I'm from Rus, I'm from Moav, I'm not a kosher Jew, and all of my children are disqualified. So Yishai had a great idea. He turns to his wife, the future mother of David HaMelech. Her name was Nitzaves Bas Adoel. He said, "It's been nice knowing you. Have a great day." He separated from his wife. He went to his maidservant, and he said, "Do me a favor, I'm going to live with you. Our children, don't try this at home, will be avadim. I'll free them, and that will be metaher them like Rav Tarfon wanted to be metaher mamzerim." So Yishai set a date to rendezvous with the Shifcha. The Shifcha was faithful to her mistress, so she told the mistress, Yishai's wife. The mistress dresses up like the maidservant. She lives with Yishai. Shortly after, she's expecting a child. Yishai says, "From who?" She doesn't say a word. The sons of Yishai say, "We have to kill Ma." He said, "Don't do it." When the kid was born, they paskined he was a mamzer. When David was born, they paskined he was a mamzer. That's what it means in Tehillim. Muzar hayisi le'echai. When did they discover the story that David wasn't a mamzer? when a man by the name of Shmuel said he's the next king of Israel. They didn't know his entire life until he was anointed David Melech Yisrael. The Arizal writes this in a few places, but this is already found in Rishonim, recorded by the Chida. Says the Chida, why was the maidservant of Yishai faithful to Nitzeves Bas Adoel? Because she was the Gilgal of Hagar. And God gave Hagar a chance to come back, to rectify not being faithful to Sarah. So she came back to this world, and in second time around, she did it right. This is what the Chida brings from Rabbi Yaakov Sakili, student of the Rashba. You can read it yourself, don't take my word for it. Number 22. And there are many, many other Makairais. The Moyadim Uzmanim actually brings it down from the Arizal in a few of his Mamarim. But this is what the Chida brings down. And I was thinking to myself, once you're coming back, look, I'm not going to bring Hagar back. It's not my job to bring Hagar back. But once the Rebbeinu Shalom is bringing her back, I could think of more than one thing she has to come back for. The only thing she didn't do in this world is she didn't honor Sarah. What about the fact that she brought into this world the Pera Adam, Yishmael, someone who wreaks havoc, someone who causes so much tsar to Klal Yisrael? Is that not something perhaps she needs to rectify? So let's come back to where we started from. Here we are. We hope we're close to the finish line. The last two Galasim, the Arizal says that Daniel in his vision saw a man. The head was Bavel. The arms were Paras and Madai. The body was Yavan. And the two long legs, the Arizal says, in Parshas Kiseitse, were Edom and Yishmael. So we're already by Ikvisa de Meshicha. We're by the heel already. The Vilna Gaon tells us, the Rav was quoting the traditions of the Vilna Gaon regarding the coming of Mashiach. The Gra says that Jewish tradition is there are two Mashiachs. Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. You ever wonder why in Shemona Esrei we have two brachos about Malchus Beis David? We have V'Yushalayim Mircha and a Semach David. Why do we have two different brachos? Arizal says, V'chisei David avdecha mehera l'seicha tachin is a tefillah for Mashiach ben Yosef, and Ki lishuascha kivinu kol hayom is for Mashiach ben David. What do we need two Mashiachs for? What, a rabbi and assistant rabbi? Is that a good idea? What do we need two Mashiachs for? How about one? One will do the job. What do we need two? The Gaon says, because in the end of the days there are two exiles. There's Galus Yishmael and there's Galus Edom. Galus Edom, Esav is called a shar, a bull, a par. Mashiach ben Yosef is Bachar Shoyroi Hadarlai. Mashiach ben Yosef takes us out of Galus Edom, the Gra says. But Yishmael is a chamar. Shavu lachem payim achamar. Mashiach ben David is chamar. Ani v'roichiv al chamar. Mashiach ben David takes us out of Galus Yishmael. Can't help but think that Hagar, who brought Yishmael into the world, so not only does she come back, and this time she's faithful to her mistress, but God gave her a chance to bring the antidote to Yishmael into the world. She's the shadchan between Yishai and his wife to bring into the world the ani v'roichev al chamar, to be mesakein the shvulachem payim hachamar. But I think this opens up for us a new understanding of Akedas Yitzchak. That the Akedah was not just a personal Nisayon for Avram Avinu. There's more than meets the eye. The Rebbeinu Shalom orchestrated that in 30 years Yishmael was not in the house because, if somebody says, he goes to the store and he orders chocolate ice cream, does that mean he likes chocolate better than vanilla? It only means he likes chocolate better than vanilla if the store also has vanilla. But if there's no vanilla in the store and he orders chocolate, well, that's the only thing they're serving. The fact that Avraham and the Rebbeinu Shalom wants Yitzchak, does that mean Yitzchak is the only heir of Avraham Avinu? Doesn't mean anything if Yishmael is out to pasture in Midbar Paran. So the Rebbeinu Shalom brings Yishmael back to the house for a night. And he says, Avraham, you know who Bincha is? You know who Yechidcha is? You know who Ahavta is? It's only Yitzchak. And what about Yishmael? Yishmael, ask him what he sees on the Har HaBayis. Say, Yishmael, you see the Shechina? Say, huh? What? Now you know what Yishmael is. Yishmael is Shavu lachem payim hachamar. If there's ever a time in history where we need to battle Yishmael, it's Akedas Yitzchak that we invoke and we have to evoke. You know, the Shlach Kadosh writes that everybody has in their life challenges that are difficult for them. Some people have a difficult time focusing their mind by tefillah. Some people have a hard time getting up early in the morning. Some people have a hard time applying themselves and learning. Everybody has particular challenges. The Shlosh says, Akedas Yitzchak is a challenge to every single Jew. What areas in my life can I summon up more Mesiras Nefesh to be able to tap into the Zchus of the Akedah? The Shlosh says, the challenges in your life, in your areas of Avodas Hashem, is your Akedas Yitzchak. And at a time in history where we know the enemy at hand is Yishmael, this is the Zechus that we need to try to tap into. We need to evoke, we need to invoke. And whatever area in our life we could identify as our Akedah, that's our personal offering and our personal contribution to be able to overcome Yishmael in our times. And let's remember the opening Balaturim in Parshas Toldos, that our Parsha ends, Al Pnei Kol Echav Nafal, that with the fall of Yishmael will come Ve'ele Toldos Yitzchak, Be'ezras Hashem, the tzmicha of David HaMelech, of the Mashiach ben David, Sheyavai b'meher v'yameinu, Amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.